Hello, I'm Charmaine Borg, and I'm an experimental clinical psychologist at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. So from earlier on, I was always interested in sexual dysfunctions and sexual pleasure, etc. But I worked at the psychiatric unit in Malta, and we dealt with a lot of people that would stop the treatment, the drug treatment, just because it had a negative impact on their sexual expression. And it always interested me how psychiatrists and other clinicians, they do not approach the topic. And it was a big taboo, perhaps Malta in particular, because of the high people devotion in religion. Maybe that also hindered the openness about human sexuality. And then I was interested after my master's to do a clinical PhD. And sexual dysfunctions or sexuality was really a topic of interest for me. And when I arrived in Groningen, I particularly selected this university because there was a multidisciplinary team approach. Like there was a gynecologist involved, an anatomist, a psychologist, and together we tried to understand why women with vaginismus, so women that about 1% of the population of childbearing age would like to have sexual intercourse, but they were unable to. So they have different expressions why this is. They might say the vagina will rupture, or I want to do it but I'm afraid I cannot. They have this catastrophic ideation almost of having intercourse. So we try to understand what if there are no physiological or structural abnormalities, how is it possible that they cannot have intercourse? And there was not so much about it. So I tried to understand first how they relate, how they respond to sexual stimulation. And we could see that they respond with disgust more than with sexual arousal. So the emotion of disgust became very interesting for us. And then we looked at how women with no sexual problems or sexually asymptomatic, they respond to sexual stimuli using a fMRI measurement. So when we measure the brain response. And there we could see that these women, they also respond with disgust to the same sexual stimulation. And in the beginning I thought, oh, maybe we're missing something or something is wrong here, because how can this be? And there was lots of media misinterpretation of what we are saying here, like porn is perceived as rotten tomatoes for women, but that was not the scope or the interpretation that we wanted to take from it. And kind of from there, we started moving towards more, the emotion of disgust seemed to be a default response. Like I said in today's presentation, that children in pre-puberty have this disgust response towards sexual stimuli. So saliva, sweat, the ejaculate, these are really disgusting. To come in contact with these stimuli, you need to be not in the right state of mind, so to say. And from then on, we kind of are trying to find what is the shift, how people change. These children change then from having more sexual willingness to come in contact with these stimuli. Is it because we have more sexual arousal that overrides the disgust response? And we are also trying to squeeze out the implications that we can learn from it. How can we upregulate sexual arousal then to downplay this disgust response that we seem to all have? Kind of that is the trajectory of my work. And now I'm also looking at, say for example, with long-term couples, we know that sexual pleasure decreases or plateaus or decreases. So we're trying to see how can we give a platform to sexual pleasure per se. So that's another link that I have. And I'm also looking at the impact of orgasm per se on sleep. Will orgasm by itself, like if you're masturbating, or within a couple after intercourse, or masturbating within a couple, have an impact on the latency of sleep, how quickly you fall asleep and how better you sleep? So we're kind of, these are the three directions I think that at the moment I'm working on. Yes, it is indeed an experimental approach to understand the kind of mechanisms that is happening. So we can observe a relationship. For example, we can tell that sexual arousal probably is what is impacting on lowering or you perceive disgusting stimuli as less disgusting. Say, if, to give a practical example, if you're in the heat of the moment and you forgot your condom, then you might think, oh, okay, it's just one time, I know this person, it's going to be okay. You're not thinking clear, of course. So we know, we can understand that by observation, sexual arousal is doing something in the perception and the willingness to come in contact with these stimuli. But there was no real evidence about it. So to understand the causal relationship, we needed to come up with an experiment. And there, when we try to induce sexual arousal, we induce general arousal, neutral state and mood, and then we provide them with these disgusting stimuli to try to, if you can, infer a causal relationship of sexual arousal on negative, aversive, disgusting tasks. I would think that it has a number of trajectories. One trajectory where we're looking at the impact of aversive smell, for example, in killing or weakening sexual arousal, or the erection, with which we found it is an existing relationship. It can be developed in knowing how to apply it. If, for example, it increases the confidence of people if they are wearing such an aversive wearable smell that they can break to kill the genital arousal of men, for example. But I think the core of my work, I really would like to focus on increasing sexual pleasure, because I believe that if sexual pleasure is put on a platform, if it's given space, it's so beneficial for people in long-term relationships that perhaps there is this plateau, sex is perceived as a task, it's so painful for the person that feels rejection or rejected, for the other person that is not willing to have sex for whatever sort of reason. So I feel that sexual pleasure is the core of what we do, but it has been neglected and forgotten for so long. And if we focus on sexual pleasure, I feel the other negative emotions, so shame, guilt, disgust, they will have less space to kind of play a role. So I think that would be my biggest vision. And then at a macro level, there are many studies that I have in mind that I'm either working on or hoping to work on. I think for psychology, for experimental and clinical psychology, it's not likely that you have a link with the industry. You can come up with interventions, specific interventions perhaps, that you market them, but I'm not going there. However, we had this opportunity where, because we found this relationship of the emotion of sexual arousal weakening the expression of disgust. So things that you avoided, if you are sexually aroused, you are now coming across them or coming in contact with them. So with the help of the startup company, Envy, they wanted to understand the other side of the relationship. So how can we weaken genital sexual arousal to protect women that feel under threat? And they did. They took kind of our scientific output and included this smell in a bracelet that they could wear. And with just one click, unfortunately I don't have it with me, but with one click you can break it, and it's sufficient to give you space to run away. Of course, rape can happen anyways with different material, with different things, but it minimizes the risk. In addition to that, what is special about this bracelet, it also gives more confidence to the people. So say in, I don't know, like in particular countries where the rape is very high, the risk of rape is very high, women now say, now we can walk across the streets without the fear that we're going to be attacked. Like, they feel more confident that they can go for it. And I think that's very special, because we rarely, as I said, in psychology, have the opportunity to have a direct social impact, I think. And this, to me at least, it feels very direct. I think the impact of the ESM men in the future is, and here and now and in the future, is very big. I'm involved in all the societies, I think, that are related to sexual medicine, and what I find special about the ESM men is that it brings so many people from different countries, but also different backgrounds, together. And we put this issue frontal. We make this issue frontal. I think sexual health as we heard today as well, has been neglected for so long. It is so important for our general health, and yet again, it keeps being always the Cinderella of our research. It's people themselves, like patients themselves and practitioners, have difficulty to talk about it first, and they also see it as a momentary thing, that it will pass, that it will be okay. So somehow it is not sufficient yet to go and talk about it and have treatment for it. So there is a lot to be done, and of course then there are big issues like abortion, not possible in all the countries, like Malta, where I come from, and sexual violence, these topics that we discuss for long, and yet again in some countries they are not well handled, I would say.